Hello there, you awakening wonders. It's Thursday, and as yet, Jesus Christ has not returned to earth. But we need you, Jesus. Come back. Let us know in the chat and comments if our Lord Jesus has made himself clear, plain to you through some sort of apparition. Doesn't count if it's in toast. Doesn't count if it's in the cloud. One actual Jesus incarnate, emanating light to change the world because we need it. Do them Trump documents show an intention to invade Iran? Is Rand Paul ratcheting it up a little bit, Gal? Is he ratcheting it up a bit? Oh no, you didn't, Rand. You didn't just go there in Bill Gates' world, did you?
Certainly did.
Rand goes to Gates land because a lot of people aren't willing to start saying in public Bill Gates and Fauci were costly contributors to the pandemic. It's Thursday. You tell us in the chat right now, what do you think the role of Bill Gates was in the pandemic? What do you think Fauci's influence was, benign or malign? If you're watching us on Rumble right now, press the red button and join us on Locals. That's our community. We've got a community. That's what people need, isn't it, Gal? Community.
That's right.
If you're watching us on YouTube or Twitter or something so young and modern I ain't even heard of it yet, say for all I know, you're watching this on Twitch. For all I know, you're extraterrestrial nation watching this in the future. You got it out one of them pods people used to do. Don't do that so much now, do we?
No.
Like pods for the future. They were always doing that when I was a kid. We're going to bury this in a pod for the future. Now, we ain't got a future. If you've got something, don't put it in a pod. Sell it. Sell it before the Mad Max apocalypse times are upon thee. So, hold on a minute. I've got some really vital and important points to make. Yeah, Rand Paul. We want Rand Paul on this show. If you know Rand, or if you are Rand, look at yourself now. Oh, yeah, I am Rand. If you are Rand, come on. And we want to talk to you about this stuff. Because even though he's a Republican, isn't he?
Yep.
And didn't he have some shares in some sort of pharmaceutical company?
Oh, we won't get into that.
It's not as bad as other people's. Because I think he's a good independent political voice. And if there's going to be change within the system, it's going to come from alliances from people from the left and the right that are willing to challenge establishment authority. And Rand Paul is willing to do that. I like his hair. It's like a baby's hair.
Well, in terms of like that alliance that you just said then, there were moments a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, where Rand Paul and him and Bernie Sanders were both interrogating the boss of Moderna. And he was like, oh, look, working together.
You're charging too much for your vaccines, they were saying,
weren't they? Saying stuff like that.
Allegedly. Might be a reasonable price for a booster. Everyone needs a little boost once in a while, and some people are willing to pay through the snout hole for it. So we're talking about that, Rand Paul. I'm doing a bit of yoga later. Stay with me for that. Why are you laughing for? Because I burped.
It was the burp.
I'm trying my hardest. I'm trying to get through life. I'm just a human being. I've got a digestive system, just like anybody else. I've got all sorts of systems that I'm running simultaneously. I'm breathing. I'm digesting. Cells are being created. I'm in tune with subtle realms. I'm doing my very best. Let's have a look at this. And by the way, because I've got to tell these people, my on-screen assistant, my friend, you might be watching us on YouTube. In a minute, we're going to go on Rumble because we told you during the pandemic that powerful political figures were not obeying their own rules and regulations. Well, now we know for an absolute fact that they weren't. While you were watching funerals on YouTube, while you were missing the birth of your baby, while you were losing jobs and losing your mind, they were having the jingle bell mingle. This is during Tier 3. Do you remember Tier 3? Tier 3 said things like, do not move a muscle, you'll kill a nan right up her lung pipe. And they were jingling and mingling during that. Look at this. This is Tier 3. You're prohibited from socialising with anybody you do not live with or have not formed a support bubble with, support bubble, in any indoor setting, private gardens or at most hospitality venues. You are not going to believe this video that we're going to bring you when you see the powerful boogieing on down while you were locked up in your home. But there's no room for any systemic change. Everything's fine. Just keep voting. Just keep handing over your tax money. Barack Obama, he ain't handing over his income tax. He's getting advice on how to avoid laws that he helped pass. Before we get into all of that, and by God, you've heard there's a hell of a lot happening. It's a crazy world we're living in. We're going to have a little look at Rand Paul. And Rand, if you're out there, and we know you are, come on our show. And if you've got access to Rand, make sure he sees this video. Look how nice we're being about Rand. Right, here's Rand on Fox questioning Bill Gates and Fauci and their role as architects to the pandemic response and whether or not they benefited in ways other than, of course, helping everyone, which is always their main motivation. You know that now. That's what billionaires do, isn't it? And bureaucrats, they help us. Thanks. Thanks for your help that's made you so rich. You must have helped us to be that rich. You must have helped me so hard. You must have helped me so hard in my privates. Let's have a look at Rand Paul on Fox right now.
But we all know that Communist China covered it up initially. How are you going to get the truth now? They won't even allow an investigation into the Wuhan Lab.
Yeah, it's not easy, and they haven't been forthcoming. I think the only way to convince them is that it won't all be about blaming them because we participated in funding this. The blame equally should go not only to Chinese authorities, but to Anthony Fauci and all those who advocated for this. But there has to be a reassessment. Look, Bill Gates has been over there recently. Bill Gates is the largest funder of trying to find these viruses in remote caves and bring them to big cities. So what happened in China is they
A beautiful way of framing it. That's part of what gain of function research requires, finding novel viruses that as yet haven't made an interspecial jump, experimenting with them in order, supposedly, apparently, and most plainly and overtly, in order to create a vaccine for a disease that doesn't exist yet. Just if some stories are to be believed, I'm talking about Schellenberger's recent revelations on this show that the Wuhan, sorry, why did I call it the Wuhan virus? The coronavirus began in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which I think is in
China.
Yes, that's where it is.
Yeah.
And I heard that the first three people, Hu, you, and Zhu, were all working in that lab. Don't be childish. And so if Fauci, of course, is because under Barack Obama, gain of function research was banned in the United States, so they transferred it to a little old place you might have heard of it called Wuhan. And indeed, it seems that Bill Gates, and we can't prove this, and we've got to be careful about this, haven't we? Especially on YouTube. Rand Paul is saying, and we've got no reason to doubt him, I don't think, that Bill Gates is the number one
research. Yeah.
He's funding it.
That's what he's saying.
Certainly, he significantly funds the WHO. 88% of its total philanthropic donations come from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Certainly, Bill Gates set up the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, $750 million he put into that. For the first part of his life, it was all paper clips and windows, wasn't it? It was all about, he helped us in a much more mercantile and observably profitable way. Now, Bill Gates' help has moved into much more diffuse and yet still helpful forms, mostly medicines, isn't it?
I thought it was interesting how he started there and kind of not buying into the anti-China narrative, which you could say that maybe would be, the kind of typical thing that Fox would do. It's certainly something that he's complained about himself in terms of members of his own party who are, in terms of like war with China, beating the drums, I think he said last week. But his point about like Bill Gates and Fauci, I mean, when you look into that, we obviously want to investigate further. Having him on the show would be great to find out what the details are about Bill Gates funding this gain of function research. But if you look at it in terms of like the cause of the pandemic, we now know because of Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi that the NIH, who Fauci was ahead of, funded gain of function research in Wuhan that led to patient zeros and then potentially the start of this pandemic.
Can you have more than one patient zero, or is that like a really bad combo on a padlock?
Went 8 to 10 hours south of Wuhan, 200 to 300 feet deep into a cave, found viruses and took them back to a city of 15 million. There are many, many scientists who think that Bill Gates is wrong in funding this, that our government's wrong, that the Chinese government...
Do you agree with Rand Paul? Do you want that kind of research done? It seems to me that is the very kind of topic that should be exposed to the searing heat of democracy. Do you want gain of function research, or do you want bureaucrats and billionaires deciding that you want gain of function research, funding it, potentially profiting from it, even though it sounds risky, and potentially that risk has already been realised in the last 3 years? Let me know in the chat where you stand on that. And is this a matter for an evolved democracy? Isn't it interesting as well the way these issues are continually framed? It reminds me of a story that we're going to be doing in a little bit, and then of course everyone's covering Trump and the secret boxes. People talk about, why has Trump got those boxes? But isn't the more important subject what is in the boxes? If there's plans for a war, then that's the story, really. And when it comes to a matter like gain of function research and whether this virus began in a bat cave, in a wet market, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, one of the neglected narratives is, should this even be happening? And who benefits from this happening? And aren't we right now in a time where we're interrogating the validity and veracity of our systems of government and commerce? And isn't this the very kind of idea that should be scrutinised? Let me know in the chat, because I'm genuinely interested if you're like, no, we've got to have our precious gain of function research. I mean, it's not the NFL. It's not the Premier League. It's not like part of our culture that we just can't give up, is it? It's not the MTV Awards, which we all know is where the great presenters shine most brightly, don't we?
We do know that.
I've always agreed that.
I think the other important point about this is that, highlighting Bill Gates and Fauci might seem a bit like, well, is it really just those two? And it can maybe feel a bit like, well, you can't just blame two people. But we know, if Michael Schellenberger is correct, that Fauci was involved through the NIH in the funding of this in Wuhan that could have led to the whole pandemic starting. We know that both of those were involved in the explanation of it. They were sending emails that were redacted and uncovered by Jimmy Tobias of The Intercept and other journalists, who found that they were, in terms of the proximal origins theory, encouraging this idea that this started in a wet market.
While they were themselves discussing the possibility that it had a clinical origin and closing down that line of inquiry, perhaps precisely because gain-of-function research is risky. And are we now experiencing those risks, and how irresponsible those that have conducted it have been? It shouldn't perhaps be happening in the first place.
We also know, obviously, that the last part of that is that they were both involved in the pandemic response. Fauci, obviously, through his role, which we all know about, and Bill Gates through the WHO and Gavi.
He was all over the TV when he Fauci, every 10 minutes telling you to put this on and take that off and stand over there. And let me tell you, the British government were happy to stand behind podiums with flags behind them, advocating for you to sit down and shut up as usual, miss your job or attend your job, depending on what economic class you exist within, were themselves ignoring their own advice. Why? It's Christmas time. You got to mingle and jingle at Christmas time, haven't you? Do you remember that when they, like, in our country, you might not know this. Let me know if you're watching this in the UK, by the way, so as we can, be British together and have bad teeth and talk all cockney. But do you remember when Boris Johnson said, oh, we're not going to cancel Christmas, then we are going to cancel Christmas? But what difference did it make to them? Because they didn't cancel their own Christmas. We're going to be exclusively discussing that on Rumble, because unbelievably, we have to censor ourselves when we're attacking the establishment. Indeed, we believe that's what the censorship industrial complex is primarily about. It's not about protecting you from harmful information, like we might advise you to take a tablet that's going to give you a bunion. It's much more likely we're going to give you an opinion that's going to make you less compliant. What do you think? Let me know in the chat. Have you noticed what the elite establishment seem to be most interested in? Is it your safety? Or is it your compliance? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the chat. And while we're on that subject, they're collecting your data in unique and nefarious ways. Because it's illegal for the state to spy on you, because Edward Snowden exposed the level to which they were spying on you, because Julian Assange, or a resident of Belmarsh here in the UK, without trial currently, revealed how your government's actions abroad are at odds, perhaps, with your own domestic requirements. We are, still discussing the ways that they access your data. It seems the government are purchasing private data from private companies in order to skirt round various regulations and rules to prevent them spying on you. Now, you remember during the pandemic when they said that the vaccine passports were only a temporal measure and it's not going to lead to social credit scoring. Remember the ways and the breadth of their deception and their lies. Well, it seems now that they're acquiring private data by purchasing it from private companies. Can you tell us a bit more about this, Gareth? The scope and scale? Is it sort of just the US?
It's the US at the moment. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, government agencies tend to have to navigate an array of laws that prevents them from tracking Americans without like a warrant or a court order. But in this case, there aren't any legal restrictions on private companies that buy, repackage and sell personal data. We've talked about it before with mainstream media, and we've talked about how those corporations themselves package and sell your data. So another way in which the kind of irony of the mainstream media coming and telling us about all these things that are dangerous, whilst not telling us about the wars that are dangerous, they're also packaging and selling off your data to the government.
That's why they can't accurately report on the scale of data capture and the way that your data is used, because they are some of the primary beneficiaries of being able to bundle and sell your data, more even than, and I don't like to say this word in mixed company, more than pornography sites. Not that I use them. Not that I use them. I merely went onto that pornography site to see whether or not it captured my data, and it didn't capture nearly so much as CNN or MSNBC or Fox, because, hey, they're all the same if you ask me, baby.
The thing is, what the government will come back and say is, oh, it's not, we don't know private things. But this is a government report that has revealed commercially purchased data can reveal sensitive and intimate information about the personal attributes, private behaviour, social connections and speech of US persons and non-US persons.
What about my private attributes and behaviours?
Plenty, I would imagine, in your case.
I ain't done nothing to be ashamed of. I was only, as I said, I was looking at that porn site simply as research, and I went straight over to MSNBC, who I know will take care of me and will protect me from information that would stop my think box from its hurty bads. Let's have a look at the mainstream.
Just to jump in quickly.
Why?
Because, we had recently, of course,
15 minutes.
The way that this was all being talked about with relation to TikTok and China, and we know why that's being used, but to that anti-China narrative. To go back to what Rand Paul said at the start, this kind of anti-China narrative that will escalate
creating
tensions.
A macro narrative about the relationship between the US and China that played out when they were saying that TikTok's dangerous, but then really what we think they were saying is use TikTok to carry our message.
But also, we're doing just as bad. We talk about TikTok spying on American citizens.
You ain't no better than TikTok. You ain't no better in it. Let's have a look at this story. This is a mad-looking news story called The Bottom Line with Dagan Duffy. He's a bloody good broadcaster. Actually, I don't know which one's Dagan Duffy. Is it him or her? Who cares? They're both nuts. I don't know if you've seen them before. Have a look at them.
Your personal data is up for sale, and
I like it, baby. She sounds like Cher in that Bubble Voice song.
Yeah, a bit
if
like
I
that.
could turn back time.
Yeah.
Like
What's the other one? The more modern one that she did.
Can't break through. That one.
That's
God,
it.
oh, I wish I had. Hold on a sec.
Wait,
it's worth it.
This will be good.
Wasn't worth it. Let's get back to the news.
it's being bought by spy agencies at the federal government. A report released by the Director of National Intelligence reveals that U.S. intel, military, and federal law enforcement agencies are buying and selling personal information.
So they're buying it from them, probably. They're buying it from Fox, MSNBC, CNN. These people are not your friends. As Terence McKenna, the great late Terence McKenna, that psychonaut, that ethnobotanist, that genius of the plant mind would say, the culture is not your friend. Of course, the culture generates magnificent things. It created Jimi Hendrix. It created David Bowie. It created John Updike. It created thousands of geniuses. It created you and me together right now. But ultimately, what is the function of the culture? It is to contain you, condition you, to conform you, to institutionalize you, and to make you passive. Now, listen, we're going to leave you now on YouTube or Twitch or Twitter or SocioBot or Handclap or Truth Social, or wherever the hell you're watching this, to show you what you've long believed. Now, you're going to want to click on the link. Click that link in the description to join us on the home of free speech, baby, which is Rumble, to have a look at exactly what parties the powerful were conducting while they were telling you to sit down, mask up, and shut up before you coronavirus to lovely old grandma. Look at what they were doing. In the background of their parties, you can see their signs saying stand 2 meters apart while they're agadooing and boogieing on down in a conga of absolute deception and treachery. Join us only on Rumble. We cannot show you this stuff. It's too explosive.